My wife did something unspeakable. Mary and I have been married for the better part of a decade now. She is the love of my life, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. The only problem is, the woman who mothered my son is no longer here. I don't mean that in a literal sense. She is alive and well. At least, as well as she can be considering the recent trauma she's been through. About 3 weeks ago, she received terrible news from back home, one that shattered her entire existence. Her parents had died. It was some freak accident, carbon monoxide poisoning. The grief overtook her to the point that she could no longer function. I thought that she would get better after the funeral, but there she was, rocking back and forth in the corner of the living room. I tried to give her as much support as I could, but no matter what I did I could not find a way to quell her pain. It finally got to the point that I feared leaving our 3-year-old with her. I needed to get her professional help. One day when she seemed in better spirits, I decided to share some news with her. I had booked a therapy appointment at the local counseling center. As she looked at the living room's blank white wall, I pressed a hand on the middle of her back, jolting her out of whatever fascination she had with its white facade. "Honey?" I said in the sweetest tone I could muster. Surprisingly, she didn't spit fire into my face like the last few times I tried to speak with her. As her eyes looked at me from behind her puffy eyelids, she gave me the first genuine smile in a long time. "Hey you," she said, a loving way she so often addressed me. I took a seat next to her on the ground, crossing my legs as I gathered the courage to send her into an inevitable fury. I took a deep breath and spit out my confession. "Honey, I'm really worried about you." My voice cracked as the words fought me on the way up. "I want to help you, but no matter what I do, I can't find a way to take your pain away," I said as she tried to process what I was saying. To be honest, after seeing her blank expression I was sure it was falling on deaf ears. That is, until her gaze dropped, and she opened her mouth, giving me a gut-wrenching response. "No one can help me." Her response was monotone and cold. I've never seen anyone experience as many contradicting emotions as she did in that instance. Her eyes signaled sadness, her brows anger, and as she returned her stare to the wall, I swear I saw a sense of hopefulness. "Only he can help me." I turned my gaze to whatever her eyes were glued to, but the wall's empty void did not instill confidence in my wife's sanity. I knew then that she was far beyond any help that I could render. I took her hands, grasping them with love. "Honey?" I questioned cautiously, but she did not return her gaze to me. Placing my hand under her chin and tilted her face back over to me, cautious, almost timid that she would chomp down on my fingers if I strayed too close. When her face was pointed towards me, but her eyes remained glued to the white walls, twisted, her irises half hidden behind the edges of her eye sockets. The sclera of her eyes webbed out with long skinny streaks of blood vessels. No matter what I said to her now it would not be registered. She had retreated into her state of extreme grief. My heart filled with dread, but for what it was worth, I was going to vent my concerns, even if they would go unacknowledged. "So, there's this doctor that was recommended to me by a friend, down at the counseling center." As expected, the words just decorated the air around her, but I pressed on anyway. "He specializes in grief counseling, and I think he could help you." Once again, the words did not register, or so I thought until I saw her eye twitch. I took that as a sign of piqued interest. "His name is Dr. Robinson. I know this is out of the blue, but I need to get you seen by a proper professional." "You need help." "Honey, this isn't normal." Her eye gave another twitch, only I finally noticed that it wasn't her eye, but something swimming around behind the little blood vessels that gave the impression of an eye twitch. What the hell, I thought to myself, taking to my knees and inching my face closer to whatever was crawling inside her eye. Upon closer inspection, something wiggled in this grotesque fashion, burrowing a path through her eyeball. The little figure inside crested its tiny little head and began chewing towards the surface of her sclera. What the fuck?" The little voice in my head said, trying to comprehend what it was seeing. A little white insect poked its head through the newly dug hole before it fell completely out of her eye like a fallen tear. It now lay on the fabric of her jeans, flopping about like a creepy crawler from hell. I pinched it with 2 fingers and held it up to the light. It was a maggot. I jumped back in disgust. Falling back onto my palms, the bug flung to some far-off corner of the room. In shock, my eyes were planted firmly on my wife. Just then my son called out, "Daddy?" This wasn't the time to indulge my son, so I returned a dismissive statement. "Not now, buddy," I responded in a shaky voice, still in shock of my wife's eye maggot. Retaking to my knees, I re-examined my wife's face. The little hole the maggot had crawled out of was no longer there. Regardless, I kept my eyes planted behind the little red blood vessels in anticipation of another wriggly figure swimming about. My wife suddenly darted her face towards mine at lightning speed, chomping her teeth onto my cheek. I felt my skin give way until the flesh freed itself from my identity. The shock of the ordeal made me wince in pain, forcing me to close my eyes. When they opened, my hand draped over my fresh wound. I held my palm out in front of me, examining the blood. "Daddy!" My son signaled his growing impatience. I ignored his whining, returning my eyes to Mary. A trail of blood dripped off her chin as the wall continued to hypnotize her. "Daddy! Can I eat this little jelly bean?" Tommy blurted out his question. Yeah, whatever you want, buddy," I said. He returned with an excited, "Yay!" I sat there for a split second before the realization hit me. Little jelly bean? The fucking maggot. No! Stop! I turned to see my son dropping the slithering insect down into his gullet. Running over to him, I clutched him by the cheeks, forcing his mouth ajar. "Spit it out," I commanded, and so he did. The maggot now lay in the center of my palm, its body cut in half by my son's milk teeth. "Ah, Dad," my son whined. "But Mommy lets me have all the little white jelly beans I want when you're at work." My skin broke out into pimples, borderline hives, as the words left his mouth. Just then I heard my wife mumbling something with a steady cadence. "Little white jelly beans, little white jelly beans, little white jelly beans." She repeatedly rocked there, singing the same song. "Little white jelly beans, little white jelly beans, little white jelly beans." I knew then that my wife could no longer be left alone with my son. I had no choice but to send my wife away to an institution. It was too dangerous to have her near my son, and, well, the help she needed would be given to her around the clock at this mental hospital. She, however, did not go quietly. I told her about the reasoning behind why the men in scrubs were wrapping her in a straitjacket. Her sickly mind could not comprehend the logic. "So, you think I'm a bad mother? How dare you? I hope they come for you. I hope they choke you in your sleep. I want you to know that I traded you for them. He can have you, I don't give a fuck." Mary blared out as they carried her off. At the time I thought it was all nonsense, but now I wished her words were some psychotic delusion. The coming days were seemingly calm. I had taken a few days off work to care for my son while I arranged for someone to babysit Tommy. For the most part, I just scrolled through my phone while my son watched cartoons. But everything changed when I saw my son whispering to the wall. The same wall my wife had prayed to for weeks on end. I shot to my feet in a slight panic. "Buddy? What are you doing?" I called out, but he didn't answer. He just kept talking to the wall in a hushed tone. I took to my feet and slowly made my way over to him. When I was inches from him, I could finally hear what he was saying. "Yeah, they're really good," he said with a chuckle. His eyes trained on the wall as if it were speaking to him. He produced a response to a seemingly one-sided conversation. "I don't know if he likes them. I can ask." He looked over his shoulder and posed a question with a grin. "Daddy, do you like jelly beans?" My heart dropped as my gaze crested over his shoulder. In his little hands were palms full of squirmy little maggots. He finally spun around and offered them up to me. I slapped the bugs out of his hands. I grabbed him by the shoulders, trying to force him to answer my questions. "Where did you get these? Where did you find the little jelly beans?" He wiped away tears and pointed at the wall. The man told me that they were from Grandma and Grandpa. I looked over at the white wall. "What man, Tommy?" "There is no man." I said, almost trying to convince myself that there wasn't something nefarious happening here. There is. There is a man. He said that he was here to bring Grandma and Grandpa back. He said he promised my mom, but we just had to give him one thing. Tommy paused, thinking of whatever this imaginary man told him. What? What does this man want? I commanded with wide eyes while shaking him with impatience. Tommy returned his eyes to me and simply stated, "You." Just then, a shadowy figure lifted its darkened tinge from the wall, disappearing into a dark passageway. I saw it move into my bedroom, but it paused as if it were waiting for me to follow it. Tommy cowered behind my legs. "It's okay, Daddy." The man said we wouldn't be apart for long. He said that all of us would be together again soon. I looked down at Tommy, who bore a hopeful expression. With a grin, he said ecstatically, "The man told me about this place called hell. He said we would all rot together very soon." I don't think he understood that sounded more like a threat, rather than a message of hope. The shadowy figure disappeared behind the door frame. "Daddy? What does rot mean?" Tommy questioned, but I didn't answer. "Are you going with him, Daddy?" "So we can all rot together," he said with mild giddiness. There was no fucking way I was going to follow whatever was waiting for me in the bedroom. Just as I was going to grab Tommy and run out of the house, he darted off towards the bedroom. I tried to make him come back to me, but he quickly dismissed my command as an option. When his little body stood at the entranceway, his eyes filled with wonder. I saw him outstretch his arms and run in for a hug, disappearing into the darkroom. I stood there frozen in fear, but the need to protect my son eventually inched me forward. As my eyes peered around the door frame, my heart stopped. Silhouetted in the dim moonlight, shining from the window, stood my two deceased in-laws. My little boy clung to his grandmother's leg. However, she did not return the gesture. Instead, she and my father-in-law kept their eyes planted directly on me. I could not get a good look at them, but I could tell that they were not okay. I'd seen them in their caskets a few weeks ago after all. The shadowy figure stepped into view from behind the recently departed couple. Whatever it was tall, standing high above my in-laws. It outstretched a hand, and as it met the moonlight, I could see that no flesh clung to its person, rather, the hand was pure ivory. I reached a shaky finger for the light switch. When it clicked on, the shadowy figure vanished. What remained was the horrific sight of my rotting in-laws. In the shine of the bright fluorescent bulb, I saw their skin literally crawling. It wasn't until a few bits of flesh dropped to the floor that I realized the little white jelly beans feasting on their flesh. Tommy looked at the bugs with a twinkle in his eyes. "You see, Daddy? The man wasn't lying. They're back. They're really back," Tommy exclaimed with excitement. Curiosity overtook him and he picked one of the jelly beans off his grandmother's leg, plopping it into his mouth. At that moment, my mother-in-law's eye fell out of its socket. It dangled there as more jelly beans crawled out from inside her cranial cavity. Tommy caught wind of the spectacle, but instead of retorting in fear, he hopped in place with giddy excitement. He found the dangling eye hilarious. His excitement quickly vanished as something caught the corner of his eye. He looked in my direction, but not at me, at something towering behind me. His little face contorted as if he were trying to comprehend something. A look of understanding washed across his face before he looked into my eyes. "The man says you have to go with him now." Suddenly, I felt a sudden draft chill the air behind me. From the corner of my eye, a bony hand crept into view. It caressed my shoulder, gripping it with ferocity, almost cracking my bones under the pressure. I forced myself from its grasp, swiveling violently around to see my aggressor. In front of me stood a tall skeleton, cloaked in a black shroud. In its hand was a massive scythe, the blade glistening in the lighting. No matter how bright the fluorescent light was, the two holes where its eyes should be appeared as black as midnight. It outstretched a hand. Pleading for me to go with it. I stammered back on my heels, trying to comprehend the situation, but bumped into cold flesh. A few bugs fell on my shirt as the smell of death hit my nose. Over my shoulder stood my burly father-in-law, his eyes devoid of life's spark. I had to get away. I grabbed Tommy, prying his hands away from his grandmother's corpse. We managed to make it to the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind us, though I think it would do little to keep the shadowy figure out. We now sit here waiting for daytime, though Tommy informs me that I belong to the man now, no matter what I do. I'm asking for help. What do I do? I'm pretty sure that my wife's made a deal with death. I'm screwed. Fucking screwed.